So I'm delighted to welcome Laura here today as an expert on wellness. Before we start, do you just want to tell us a little bit about yourself, what people should know about you?
I'm Laura, and thank you so much for inviting me. And I run a company called Living with Hope, and the name of my business kind of encapsulates how I live my life, really. I've lived with breast cancer in my life for 23 years,
Wow.
and for the last 16 of those years with the incurable form of breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer. And so, Living with Hope is summarizes how I live my life, and this idea that I retrained in mindfulness and meditation, that's helped me to live well whilst living alongside an incurable form of cancer. I've got two children, grown-up children now. Megan's 26 and Jack's 23. And the reason I always mention the fact that I've got two children is that my whole experience with cancer started when my son was 6 months old. And that was the turning point where my mental health took a bit of a decline. And I mentioned that kind of right at the beginning because that led me into a whole new world of navigating life with a cancer diagnosis, two small children, and wondering how on earth I was going to manage.
And that was, remind me, how long ago?
I was 34, so that was September 2001. So that was my first cancer diagnosis. Another one came along, another breast cancer diagnosis came in 2004, 3 years later. And again, I thought that would be the end of that. I had a mastectomy with reconstructive surgery that time. But then in 2007, the cancer spread into my lungs and pleural lining. And that was when it was deemed stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, which is incurable. But I've been living like that since December 2007. So a long history of cancer running alongside a long history of how that impacted and impacts my mental well-being.
And almost 25, almost a quarter of a century later,
Yeah.
and you're looking extremely well. So I guess there's a huge amount we can learn from you.
I think the biggest thing that I could share is that, we can be in front of the best oncologists in the world, have access to the newest drugs, but what really determines our ability to live well is this mental space that we carry around with us every day. So that's where I've had to devote a lot of time and effort and energy into addressing that. So I can cope with the side effects of the treatment that I'm on quite well, actually. But it's the mental fallout from living with uncertainty and living with a life-limiting disease.
And in your case, it's a life-limiting disease, but I guess all of us have mental pressures,
Absolutely.
and knowing how to navigate that, how to make the best of it, actually how to make it work for us, has got to be part of the secret of life, hasn't it?
I think what we all need extra help with and extra support is how to live well with ourselves. And when I say that, I'm talking about how to live well with what our mind can do to us and where our thoughts take us and the whole process of what happens in that. Um, because I know things are changing a little bit now, but children go through their schooling and there's little attention given to mental well-being. Um, as I say, it is changing now. However, there's a lot more that needs to be done because I think two of the things that underpin my daily practice, my mindfulness meditation practice, which I'll talk a little bit about, are these two pillars of living well: self-kindness and self-compassion. So our ability to live well as a human being with ourselves is about applying the same kind of kindness and compassion that we seem to be able to readily give to other people, applying that to ourselves first and foremost.
So you've opened the door. Talk to me a bit more about that because I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Well, in my early 20s, that was when I was first introduced to a meditation house group. And so you're talking kind of in the early 80s, really, mid 80s. And meditation wasn't a thing then, really, but a friend of our family set up a house group, and me and my friends used to toddle along every week. Um, so I was involved with a group of people that were in the mid-80s talking about the mind and meditation and how that can help, but it wasn't really until my own cancer diagnosis that I really started to consider how best I could help myself. I guess at that time, when I had the secondary diagnosis, the metastatic breast cancer diagnosis in December 2007, how I could live well with the time that I had, because the prognosis that I was given was 2 years. My oncologist that I'm still with now, and everybody who has looked after me as part of that medical team, never thought that I would still be here. But being here is the whole point. This idea that living presently and being in the moment, and it may sound like a cliche, but many of us spend a lot of our time not being present. So how we live well amidst uncertainty and the kind of diagnosis that I live with, but actually lots of people have their own challenges. Mine happens to be living with uncertainty that a cancer diagnosis presents, but everybody has a challenge of their own. So I've met lots and lots of different people who have been through many different kinds of experiences that I have never experienced. But I think what we all share in common is that we're all human, and so because of that, there's more that is the same about us than is different. So my introduction to mindfulness really came in 2012. I was referred onto an 8-week program, not far from here actually, Newton Aycliffe, and that program was my first introduction to a formal mindfulness meditation program. And I have to say, back then I didn't really, it didn't click with me. It wasn't until about a year or so later. And I've also been supported through that with clinical psychology support. So I've had professional help with that since 2008. And I'll continue to have that support forever, because it's part of my living well. I probably don't exercise as much as I should, but where I spend my time is exercising my mind, looking at how I can support that. I like walking. I've got some limitations with joint problems and things, but this idea of living well with me means that I can live well amongst others. And so my introduction to meditation and mindfulness then led me to train in it myself, and I trained with an organisation called Breathworks. So that's where my main focus of my work is now, guiding and supporting people in a one-to-one capacity in group work, but I also work with organisations that support people who have had a cancer diagnosis as well.
I think if I can just pick up on something that you said there, that and you've touched on meditation, you've touched on mindfulness, you've touched on breath work, all of which are, I feel big topics, but one of the things that you said that I find gives a lot of hope to me personally is the fact that you said, and I didn't get it at first, because I think for a lot of us, well, for me, getting some of this stuff doesn't happen on day one.
Of course, yeah, and it's developing a skill. It's bringing it into your life as a daily habit, and that takes time. And just because I teach mindfulness and meditation doesn't mean that I'm an expert in it, and I kind
or that it's easy for you,
or that it's easy. It's doing something that on some days I don't want to do. Some days we can't bother to cook ourselves a meal, but we have to eat. And the habit, the practice that I've got now is if I don't do my meditation, it's a little bit like I feel like I haven't cleaned my teeth.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel quite right. I don't feel quite right. But it's meditation's got lots of different interpretations about what it is, because there's lots of different types of meditation. So the type that I'm trained in is mindfulness meditation, where we're paying attention to the natural rhythm of the breath. So this term breathworks that is very popular at the moment, that happens to be the name of the organisation I trained with, but it also describes a way of breathing that is consciously controlled. So in mindfulness meditation, we don't hold the breath or count the breath. We simply observe the natural rhythm of the way our body is being breathed. But other types of breath work is where there's some manipulation of the breath, where we might be encouraging ourselves to breathe in a particular way and count with that breath and
Yeah.
hold that breath, extending the inhales and exhales. And they all are relevant, and they all do certain things and have an impact in the body, and of course on the mind. But mindfulness meditation is a specific way of meditating where we're simply following the natural flow of the breath.
Yeah, and let me ask you before we get into, or maybe instead of getting into the detail of stuff, if you were to give an overview of wellness, how would you describe it?
My view on that is that, we're talking about holistic wellness. So one of the things that I'm involved in, I'm the patron of the Trinity Holistic Centre at James Cook University Hospital.
Okay.
And that's a charity that provides complementary therapy care for people who have had a cancer diagnosis, any kind of cancer diagnosis, and who are receiving their treatment within the South Tees Trust. So that model of care, holistic care, is looking at somebody's physical, mental, emotional and spiritual well-being. So, and of course, spirituality means different things to different
Yeah.
people. Some people have a strong religious faith. Other people don't have any religious beliefs, but they are still spiritual and exploring that, what that means for them. So I think it's this multifaceted approach to wellness, because we could be the strongest and most physically fit, but mentally have a lot of areas that need assistance and help and support. So it's the whole package, really. It's not just about eating well, living well. It's about how well we're able to tune into our emotional landscape and what our thoughts and our head are doing to us and how they influence us.
And that's a huge topic, isn't it? I mean, personally, I'm no stranger to mental ill health, but one of the things that I've found is that the more I can keep this on track, the more the rest of me just works.
Yeah,
Or I'm not bothered about the bits that don't work. It's
yeah,
maybe another way
yeah.
of putting it.
I think the whole way in which our mind works and influences our thoughts, and you see, that's one of the big misconceptions that I had when I first came to meditation, that meditation was going to help me clear my mind of thoughts. Well, of course, our mind is a thinking organ. It's designed to think. So it's more about having an awareness of where those thought processes are taking us, and
Yeah.
creating a little bit of space between them and us so that we can have a pause, notice what our thoughts are doing, come back into the body and notice the breath. So we're thinking all day long. As I'm speaking, I'm thinking about what I'm saying next, and as you're listening, you're processing what I'm saying and thinking about what you're saying next. So this two-way exchange of how our minds are currently, we're physically present, but our minds are already thinking ahead about what's happening next.
Yeah.
So it's that idea that the more we can be present without our thoughts taking us to things that haven't happened yet and to things that have previously happened, the more we can get to enjoy of our present day.
Being present and being present.
And being present, yeah.
And that ties back to the power of now, doesn't it?
Yeah. So this idea that, in my work and in my life, I've met literally hundreds of people who've had a cancer diagnosis. And irrespective of what our individual circumstances are, all any of us have is now, today, well, this moment, and
Which has just gone.
which is just gone, and there's another one about to happen. And of course, we don't know what's going to happen next. None of us do. Some people believe that people have the ability to foresee into the future, but generally speaking, none of us know what's around the corner. And so I guess to some degrees, we all live with uncertainty. A life-limiting disease has a certainty to it, in that it's a disease that is going to limit your time here. But even when people experience something as severe as that, a diagnosis of a life-limiting disease, for example, it doesn't stop the worrying about the what if,
Mm.
you know, that natural trait that we have as human beings, which is about what do people think of us? Have I said the right thing? The ability to go over and procrastinate and kind of catastrophize. We all have that ability. So it doesn't matter what has happened to us or is happening to us in life events. We've all got this ability to worry, to be anxious, to experience quite, charged, challenging emotions. Because it's not as easy as saying, well, I live with this big diagnosis, so I'm not going to worry about that. But we all do still worry about little things. And it's trying to live well in understanding that we can all chase the big things, and of course it's nice to have nice things, but really when it all comes down to it, it's the little things that we notice through our busyness of doing and living life in a certain way. It's those little things that we tune into and notice that always turn out to be the big things, the things that are most important.
And being able to control what we focus on,
Yeah.
you would suggest is a really important thing to.
So it's that idea that, so if I sit down and do a meditation, or if I'm guiding somebody in a meditation, it's this idea that we're trying to shape our awareness. So we're paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Now that little phrase, they're not my words, they're a definition that's well used and recognised by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was the founder of mindfulness meditation and who developed the very first mindfulness-based stress reduction program in 1979 at the University of Massachusetts. And most of what he has done, that's what we know about mindfulness in the Western world. But it summarises what we're doing. We're trying to direct our attention in a particular way, in the present moment, on purpose. And in mindfulness meditation, we're using the breath and our 5 senses to allow us to do that. So to be present, you and I are present with each other. So we could be sat across a table and enjoying a meal with a friend, and the friend's sharing some experience with us, but we only hear part of what's being said because our mind is elsewhere having its own conversation with us about something else. So mindfulness, that word, can be applied and put in front of anything. The idea of mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful listening, mindful communication, mindfulness as in mindfully meditating. So we're hearing a lot about these words now in the field of wellness. But really, what I'm passionate about is trying to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to access something like mindfulness meditation, because it isn't something that's just reserved for a certain group of people. And of course, once we've been taught how to do it, we've got everything that we need to do it. So we just need our breath and our senses.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing magical about what we need to do it. It's training ourselves and developing that skill on a daily basis.
And I know you came to this because of that, or those diagnoses. Is that the plural of diagnosis? I guess it probably is. For me, and I work with business owners and business leaders all the time, and one of the reasons that I do that is that my belief is that the stress of owning and running a business can be catastrophic in a different way, but nonetheless catastrophic. And that ability to control, if that's the right word, your thoughts and how you're thinking about stuff and where you focus, what you're thinking about, has to be a huge advantage for people in that kind of situation. Does it not?
I think the one of the difficulties that we all face now is this idea that we're all connected 24/7. So
tell me about it.
That's in our personal life, in our business life, in our professional life. So it's making a conscious choice to decide how busy we're going to let our mind be and when. So the busyness of our mind is something that's happening all of the time. There's thoughts popping in and out of our head continuously all day long. And this idea that we're doing a lot of the time. So we need to be in that mode to get anything done.
Yeah.
So problem solving, evaluating, analysing, comparing, contrasting. And we live with a judging mind. One of the things that we're judging the most is ourselves. So that bit about, paying attention in the present moment on purpose in a particular way and non-judgmentally, that bit's really important, because that's the hard bit, because we live with a judging mind, and it's enabling ourselves to notice what we're judging and when that includes judgment of ourselves. That is often and mostly because of the negative bias of the mind, leading to thoughts that are about, you're not good enough, you can't do this, you're going to mess up, what will people think of you, make a mistake. The mind won't naturally lend itself to thinking, this is going to go really well, everything is going to be fine, people will receive the presentation well. The brain doesn't work like that. So knowing that is one of the things that we are able to learn about ourselves with mindfulness and meditation. And so we have activities that are encouraging us to seek out pleasant aspects of our experience, because the brain won't naturally hang on to that.
Do it itself. Yeah.
It will seek out what went wrong. It will hang on to the unhelpful memories, the unpleasant memories, the things that didn't go well.
Negative bias, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. So that's something that is our natural trait, which unites all of us, because that's the gift we've been given of evolution, linked to thousands of years of evolving, where our fight and flight and freeze mechanism has evolved to a point where our survival is about looking out for danger. So although we're not perhaps consciously aware of that, that's what the mind is doing.
Yeah.
So understanding ourselves better is all part and parcel of mindfulness and meditation, and making conscious choices about how busy or not we want to be. So if we choose to, we could be connected to work, to technology, to communication across the globe 24 hours a day. But we were never designed to be like that. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors had downtime where they rested, they fed well, they reserved their energy for hunting or being hunted. But the demarcations of our downtime and rest time, that's all blurred now. That doesn't exist.
Absolutely not.
So it's about helping ourselves to live well by creating what I call these little pauses and spaces in our day to come out of the busyness of doing and to move into, which is all about headspace stuff, to move into what we call a little bit of a more gentler space, which is being. We can still be doing something while we're in being mode, but it's a much slower place to be. And the point about it is that we give ourselves permission to just do one thing at a time. Because the world we live in, we're multitasking all of the time, perhaps without even realising
I was just going to say whether we realise it or not.
Yeah. So, this idea that we could be having a conversation and having a meal with someone, but also watching the TV, scrolling through the phone, the food is going in, but we don't register that particularly. So if I was guiding somebody to experience more moments in the day where they're kind of in a being mode of existence, it's that thing of just allowing yourself to do that one thing, to have a meal where you're tuning in with your five senses to what you're eating, the texture of the food, the way that your hands hold the utensils, the smells, the flavours. I always use the example of, I like Kit Kats, especially four-fingered ones. And it's that idea that if I'm behaving mindlessly, I'll reach for another stick of Kit Kat and it's gone. Because I haven't been present for eating the previous four sticks. And that might sound like a silly example, but it just illustrates that we're doing something, but we're not present for it. So paying attention to times in our day where we can create, and for want of a better word, schedule, like all things are scheduled within the world of work, meeting times, the time a meeting's going to finish, presentation times, everything has a time and a finish. A start and a finish. And it's carving into the day those little spots of time where you can just come to a place of stillness, even if it's for a few minutes, to focus on the breath, tune into the senses, have an awareness of your emotional presence as well. Because mindfulness and mindfulness meditation is as much about noticing what's going on externally as it is internally.
Yeah.
Because what's going on in here, our emotional presence, that's influencing the way we act, the way we behave, our choice of language, the way we communicate to people. So, yeah, I mean, having been in a place where I never thought I would be able to be present ever again, and living in a pretty mixed up place here,
Yeah.
to be able to have moments in each of my days now where I can choose to step back, to focus on my breath. And it doesn't have to be a formal meditation. It doesn't have to be with eyes closed. And some people don't close their eyes for meditation. We can simply lower our gaze. But the important point is choosing to pause. And when I'm talking to people about how they can build mindfulness and meditation into their day, often what I hear most of is, I'm too busy to do all that.
Yeah.
But that's the time when we need it most. Because in terms of the world of work and how we can become more emotionally resilient and perhaps more creative, it's having times where we're doing nothing. So that might sound counterproductive, but each of us only have an attention span for so long. And it's the cramming and the constant doing and the analysing what's going on and the planning and the predicting and that makes us exhausted.
I was just going to say that even just thinking about it is exhausting.
Yeah.
And if we're doing that, which most of us are all of the time, is it any wonder that we're such a short fuse and so exhausted all of the time?
And of course, now there's so much science to back up all of this. So, this isn't me sitting here saying this. This is backed up by neuroscience that tells us what's happening within the brain and the body when we are constantly doing and living such a fast-paced life. So there's a lot of science now about being outside, being amongst nature, and how being in nature has an impact on the neurotransmitters in our brain. So the same neurotransmitters that we are influencing through meditation practice, so increased output of serotonin and endorphins, and some kinds of meditation, so for example a loving kindness meditation or an open-hearted acceptance practice, we're also stimulating the production of oxytocin as well. So they're the same neurotransmitters that we're influencing when we're outside in green spaces.
Yeah.
So.
And the same ones, I think I'm right in saying, that are absent when people are depressed.
Much lower levels.
Yeah.
So heightened levels of adrenaline and cortisol. And so the National Institute of Clinical Excellence, their guidelines are now that if somebody has had 2 or more recurring bouts of clinical depression, they can access an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program on the NHS. Yeah. So this impact of mindfulness meditation on depression and how it can help over time. It's not an answer for everything, but over time it can help people who've had experience of recurring bouts of depression where they don't seem to be getting the kind of support that they thought they might from their antidepressants. And of course, I'm very much about talking about complementary and holistic care. So this idea that somebody can still be on antidepressants and be practicing mindfulness, the two sit together, and there isn't any reason why people have to come off antidepressants to access something like mindfulness meditation, because antidepressant medication has a very important place as well. So it's about having a little toolkit of things to help ourselves, because one thing on its own won't necessarily work as well as in combination with other things, perhaps.
And I think just going back to this busyness, once upon a time I would associate extreme busyness with high achievers, but actually because of that always on society, because of phones, because of all the rest of it, that same level of busyness is now pretty much forced on everybody, isn't it?
And I think it's that sense of, if we look back now and look at how people reach burnout, there will always be a link between the amount of time they have been working incessantly with insufficient breaks and downtime
And rest, yeah.
and rest. You know, there's so many wonderful books out there now about the art of rest and being still and doing nothing and learning again to do nothing because of the benefits that can bring to us. So sitting and doing nothing has got enormous benefits for the mind and body.
But there's a way to sit and do nothing that's more beneficial than I might just sit and do nothing, for argument's sake.
So I think as well there's a difference between sitting still in meditation and relaxing.
Yeah.
So some people might find it relaxing to watch a film, read a book, listen to music, but that's not meditating.
No, and this is still busy.
And this is still busy. It's still processing what you're reading, what you're watching, listening to the music. So formal meditation, where we either sit or lie down and sit for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, that's different to relaxing. But we are working towards a world now where we know the impact of being super busy. And this wearing this badge of honour of busyness, where that leads to and where it can lead to. So it's all about balance, really.
And I think that's a big change. I mean, when I was younger, you know, I can sleep when I die, no gain without pain, with a currency of the time. And slowly but surely people are starting to see the fallacy in that.
And I think what happens is it's counterproductive because all of that busyness leads to poor sleep. So that's one of the wonderful things, that if it's practiced over time and you develop a daily meditation practice, it can really help improve broken sleep patterns. Neuroscientists are telling us now that practice regularly, it can help reduce inflammatory markers in the body. We know that a lot of people in my classes and sessions, if they have a watch that can tell what their heart rate is, they take it before the meditation and after, and also notice that impact continues when they've left the session as well. So we know that it influences heart rate and blood pressure. And the wonderful thing that I find fascinating is that if we physically exercise, we can see what's happening to our muscles, or the tone of a muscle, or the shape of the body over time, but we can't see what's going on in here. So the idea of being wired to a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, where the different parts of the brain are lighting up and the neural pathways are kind of wiring and firing together in a certain way when we meditate, in contrast to what's happening when we're super, super busy, racing about, not pausing, 1,001 thoughts trickling through our mind at once. That's what I'm really interested in. The actual physiological changes that happen in the body when we practice meditation regularly. And there's so much more that we need to know about that. But even the evidence that we have now says that it's impactful.
And there is quite a lot of empirical evidence now, isn't there? Yeah. I think that's one of the fascinating changes for me, the last 20 years since I've been working as a coach, is that some of the stuff that we believed 18, 19 years ago, we've now been able to prove or disprove.
Yeah.
And to me, it's fascinating how much we've been able to, of what we knew, we've been able to prove. So those good practices are now scientifically proven good practices.
Yeah, and this idea that what we have in here I mean, I use the word brain and mind interchangeably,
Yeah.
but we have an organ that is neuroplastic. So it's changing in shape. Different parts of the brain are changing in shape all of the time. And it wasn't that long ago that scientists used to think that the brain was a static organ.
Yeah.
So it's those neuroplastic changes that we can see being influenced by meditation, but also paying attention in a particular way on purpose. So general mindful living.
And that's got very little to do with age. We don't lose that plasticity as we get older.
No, in fact, what some of the science is showing is that people that develop a meditation practice later in life, 70s plus, actually new neurons develop. So the neural pathways are strengthened. So there's a lot of interest in how meditation could impact or limit the onset of Alzheimer's and dementia. And that's, just the tip of the iceberg stuff that we're seeing now. But so to me, it's fascinating that we walk around as a human being and we think it's just us that feels a particular way. But this sense of connection that we get when we practice meditation with others, we interconnect, and from that realise that we are all more alike than we're unalike.
I think that's a great phrase, and one that I'm going to pinch.
I've pinched it from somewhere. That won't be my phrase, but it's stuck with me because it's true. We all look differently, and what we how we present ourselves to the world, we look a certain way, but within, we all have emotions. We all have a mind that works in a particular way. We all have breath that comes in and comes out of our body, and we can work with these tools that we already have to help shape and influence our well-being.
Yeah, and as I said before, I've proven to myself the more I can work on the inner bit, the outer bit either takes care of itself or matters less.
I think that's really true, because the attention we pay to what we look like, that actually makes us less well inside. So when people are very attached to their appearance, what they look like, the aging process, that is a route to unwellness.
Self-defeating, really, isn't it?
Yeah, because we're all going to age. That's another given. We all will get older. We will look older. And of course, there's lots of things that people might engage in to try and delay the onset of aging, physically, etc. But actually, you can pay as much attention to this, but really, the proper work goes on in here.
On the inside. Yeah. Again, it's like you said, you started off by saying it'd be in front of the greatest oncologist in the world. But it's what's going on the inside that's going to be the difference that makes a difference.
It's the ability to live well with the information that you've been given. So anybody that receives terrible news, such as a cancer diagnosis, that is a trauma. So it's a traumatic event. And there's a whole list of things that we could describe as traumatic events, and everybody has their own experiences. But what happens to us when we're left to cope with that trauma? Some people find other routes, alcohol dependency, substance misuse. There's lots of different ways that people could try to dampen down that trauma, but really, ultimately, that's not the most helpful route.
And again, I think the other thing is that everybody's exposed to trauma through social media, the pressures of life in the 21st century, stuff that, as a kid, I didn't have to deal with. I didn't have to deal with social media. Certainly our parents didn't.
Yeah.
And that is particularly traumatic. I met a guy over the last couple of days who, one of his driving ambitions is to change education. because he says that the way he was educated is exactly the same way as his children would be educated, and yet the world is totally, totally different. And of course, one of the things he was referring to is the ability to deal with that world.
Yeah.
Because the world that a child is born into today is very different to the world that you and I were born into.
And this natural nature of the brain to judge and compare and contrast is being fueled by our exposure to what we see
Hyperfueled,
on internet, social
turbocharged,
media.
yeah.
So the
Well,
brain didn't need any help
that's all that's about.
judging ourselves and
Yeah.
comparing ourselves to others. And so it's got this source of fuel now, internet, social media. And people, we all need to be very aware of the things that we're looking at on social media and understanding what's triggering our feelings of low self-esteem, self-doubt. A lot of that comes from the things we willingly expose ourselves to.
And we have a choice in that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the problem we have now is that our young teenagers who are, most of whom have a mobile phone, they're exposed to a lot of stuff on social media that is fueling their feelings of unworthiness and I'm not as good as that person, I want what they've got. And it's about aspiring to be somebody else and not themselves.
Not happy with what they've got, who they are, where they are.
And of course, that's where the support and the tuition and the education is needed so that young people understand a lot of what we see on social media, it's not real. It's manufactured. Filters, whatever the technological word is, for how people enhance what we see. Well, and then AI is a whole different story. But we've got to really consider very seriously what all of that is doing to our well-being.
And of course, you were brought to this world because of that diagnosis, that illness.
Yeah.
But am I right in saying that the solution or the antidote or the medicine that you found, which is mindfulness meditation, is applicable to everybody, everywhere?
Yeah, I mean, there are some, if people work with me on a one-to-one basis or a group session, everybody is at liberty, everybody is asked to disclose their medical conditions, because there are some conditions like schizophrenia, for example, where mindfulness meditation is not advised, it's not recommended. So, but the vast majority of people can benefit from mindfulness meditation. It doesn't matter what walk of life you're from. And the approach that I'm trained in is completely secular, so it's not attached or affiliated to any religious persuasion or belief. Whether you have a religious faith or not, you can practice mindfulness meditation.
Yeah, and I've read an awful lot about the pressures that my world is business and business people, and I'm very aware of the pressures that they're under, but I'm less aware or less experienced in experiencing the benefits of a countermeasure like meditation, mindfulness. But it strikes me that if you're going to be, we talked about the importance of rest, but if you're going to be running a race every day, you've got to be getting good rest in between.
Yeah, and refueling and recharging and resetting. And so athletes now practice mindfulness and meditation.
Yeah.
So in all levels of society, in all areas of society, it's got a place. But that idea of top athletes at the height of their physical fitness still need to attend to the well-being of their mind. And some people might argue that it's not just the strongest, fastest person that will win the race. It's the
most of it happens up there, doesn't it?
Mm.
That's 6 inches of real estate between the ears.
Yeah, And it's fascinating, that really, because I'm very interested in reading about people who survived the Holocaust,
All right.
and this idea of resilience, and that it wasn't the strongest, most physically fit people a lot of the time that survived. It was those that were mentally strong. And the horrors of what people were exposed to during the Holocaust, the atrocities that took place and how that impacted the mind and the working of the mind. I mean, we all need to remember.
And as a matter of interest, did you Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl?
Yes, I've got that book at home. Yeah, I've read that. Yeah. I mean,
and that's what that's about, really, isn't it?
yeah, and this little book, it's not that thick, is it? It's just,
No.
It's a book
A skinny book.
that really I would recommend everybody
Yeah.
should read, because there's some fascinating insights in there. Yeah.
Well, that's excellent. I think we will probably talk all afternoon, and we probably will once these cameras have stopped rolling. But that's, if you had one last message that you wanted to give out, Laura, what would that be?
What meditation helps me do is live with hope. And I think hope runs through us all. And this idea that not losing sight of hope by having a way of living that means we can enjoy the moment. So whatever lies ahead, it's strengthened by this practice of meditation, and for me, living with hope as well.
And we just a few words in as we end. We talked about, I've just come back from a conference, and you mentioned resilience a few minutes ago. And one of the things that we were discussing was not the concept of resilience, but the concept of antifragility. There are certain materials that become stronger through the experience of whatever it may be. And actually, I think that's what we should be trying to develop, antifragility. So we're actually getting stronger rather than just coping with the pressures of the world.
And I think that is really important, because one of the cornerstones of mindfulness and meditation practice is this idea of imperfection, that we're all fragile and vulnerable as human beings.
Yep.
And we're all imperfect. And that's the starting point. And it's coming back to that over and over again. So this idea that we learn to live well with ourselves, with all of our fragility and vulnerability and imperfection, and moving forward with that rather than trying to get rid of that, because that's part of us all.
And there's nothing wrong with that. That's who we are.
Yeah.
I do like that phrase, learning to live well with ourselves. I really do.
Yeah.
So important. Been a fascinating conversation,
Laura.
Laura.
Thank you for inviting
Thanks
me.
ever so much. I'm
you.
going to have to go back and watch this again, because I was so fascinated with what we were talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.